What do Coca-Cola, cattle ranchers, and Cirque du Soleil all have in common? Why, they can all be found at Disney Springs. And if you don't know what Disney Springs is, let me thoroughly assure you that by the end of this video, you will know. And you'll be qualified enough to brag to everyone while you wait in a half-an-hour queue for half-pound cookies on a scorching day in the middle of July. A themed multi-use retail centre inspired by Florida's charming waterfront towns, historic architecture, and natural beauty. This spot has so much going on that it warrants a 38-minute video, and I can't wait to tell you all about it. When Disney Springs opened less than a decade ago, replacing the long-standing Downtown Disney, it was touted as another fully immersive addition to the Disney entertainment catalogue. Featuring a backstory, new entertainment and dining options, and beautifully crafted outdoor spaces, Disney Springs was set to elevate the simple mall shopping routine and make it an experience. But how well did it achieve this? Before we even begin our analysis, we should do some contextualising. Webster's defines a mall as an urban shopping area featuring a variety of shops surrounding a usually open-air concourse reserved for pedestrian traffic, and, love them or hate them, malls have been a cornerstone of American culture for over half a century, rapidly growing in popularity following the Second World War. Described as a suburban outpost, malls thrived in the absence of pedestrian-friendly towns and cities, replacing city centres and offering convenience, comfort and entertainment to the American middle classes and beyond. While malls have undeniably seen an equally rapid decline since the turn of the century, some continue to thrive and become tourist destinations in their own right. One day I intend to do a full pipeline video exploring how the humble shopping passage became the decorative shopping arcade, and then morphed into the sprawling shopping centres we know now. But for today we'll be discussing one in particular, Disney Springs. This video intends to serve as a narrative offshoot from the bigger Disney Springs tree which will inevitably come, so this time around we'll be focusing less on the history and origins of the shopping mall model and of Disney Springs, and more on just the lore and the justification behind its presence. For the purpose of this video, we will be categorising Disney Springs as a mall. The wider mall model was designed and curated to turn shopping into a form of entertainment, and this sentiment is perfectly captured here with the intended purpose of the complex. With 125 acres of music, water features, art and murals, live performers, both mobile and static, beautiful architectural design and a built-in backstory, Disney Springs is far more than a simple shopping environment. And so today we'll be sharing and dissecting the absurd lore of Disney Springs and looking at how and why, in the ever-developing sphere of immersive experiences and products, it came to be, exploring the underlying context behind the decision to both redesign the shopping complex and, in a completely unprecedented move, to apply a backstory to it, considering whether it's even remotely necessary and how the presence of said lore influenced the execution of the product we see today. It's a lot, so grab yourself a hot drink, sit down and get ready. Hi, I'm Jo. I cover theme park history and hot takes, all things visitor attractions, and occasionally discuss fictitious backstories featuring 19th century cattle ranchers. So if this is the kind of thing you're interested in, you can subscribe to my channel and turn on your notifications so you don't miss out on any of the other exciting upcoming videos. And be sure to let me know what niche tourism analysis you'd like to see next. But without further ado, let's begin. So before we discuss the lore, let's discuss the brief history of both Disney Springs and how it slots into the broader mall scene. Before Disney Springs was Downtown Disney, the shopping complex first opened as the Lake Buena Vista Shopping Village back in 1975. Interestingly, this shopping village beat out some of Florida's most noteworthy tourist shopping competitors by almost a decade, opening way before other popular destinations like the Premium Outlets and the Florida Mall. Over time, more shops and restaurant offerings were added, and after brief stints as the Walt Disney World Village and Disney Village Marketplace, the complex settled on the name Downtown Disney in the mid-90s, serving as a home for everything from giant music stores to multi-floor video game complexes, replica steamboats and nightclubs to compete against similar offerings thriving in downtown Orlando. Downtown Disney is most infamously notable for its iconic defunct attractions, including Pleasure Island and Disney Quest, both of which will be explored in upcoming videos. But in March 2013, it was announced that Downtown Disney would be renamed once more and become Disney Springs, bringing not only an architectural overhaul, but, in due course, the closure of multiple attractions and stores. With the tagline of "Happily Whatever You're After," Disney Springs debuted in 2015 and is promoted as a destination that has whatever you're after and more. Described as having a lush, old Florida feel, it boasts 95 shops, pavilions and pop-ups, 70 dining options including table service, quick service and lounges, and 25 entertainment offerings like attractions and shows, including the world-famous Cirque du Soleil and hot air balloon rides. Many of these outlets are operated by rent-paying third parties, ensuring it's not only entertaining for guests, but also financially viable for the Disney company, operating similarly to typical malls in this sense. While Disney Springs in offerings doesn't feel too far removed from downtown Disney, there is one marked change upon its reopening that was impossible to ignore. It now had a backstory. Within the context of Disney, this didn't feel particularly strange. After all, Dinorama in Animal Kingdom has a layered fictitious history based around researchers and ambitious students looking to make a little bit of extra money on the side, and the Haunted Mansion queue line has nods to characters only seen for a matter of seconds within the attraction. But within the context of shopping complexes and malls, it definitely did feel strange. Previously, malls had operated as almost cookie-cutter shells, offering little more in terms of immersion than a glass roof and some fountains. These features served less as theming and more as motivational draws for customers, with Alexandra Lang, author of Meet Me by the Fountain and Inside History of the Mall, discussing how plinths and pools of a fountain operate as a source of entertainment and play for children. She also explored how the mall, here being any generic mall or shopping centre, serves as a strange quasi-fitness space, and there are even cases where mall walking is prescribed as a form of exercise. Predictability and safety, adequate seating, open walkways and bathrooms provided by these spaces are affordances that most cities and suburbs and many public parks struggle to offer. Lang describes how somehow the mall has become a key provider of social goods which are seldom found elsewhere. There's a broader social commentary to be had there, but I can absolutely attest to this in this context. I frequently visit Disney Springs with the intention of being able to walk about freely, to see bodies of water, and to get some exercise in comparatively fresh air. For a while, it was something I felt ashamed to admit, but having done my research, I realised that I wasn't an isolated case. So, despite its soon-to-be explored differences from the traditional mall model, I would feel comfortable classifying it as such in consideration of the given definition and Lang's defining features. Knowing this, we can conclude that while some malls operated similarly with arcades, attractions and movie theatres, there had never been anything quite like Disney Springs when it opened, given that it offered up such an absurd and seemingly out-of-place backstory, but for what reason? I know you're eager for an answer, but before we can understand the why, we must first establish the wider what. Which brings us ever so nicely to the core focus of this video, the absurd lore of Disney Springs. So for this, we're going to suspend all disbelief and take ourselves out of the present and instead back to the mid-19th century. Both Arthur Levine's USA Travel Today special, Disney Springs, the story behind Disney World's former downtown Disney, and entries from the Main Street Gazette blog were particularly valuable reference sources for this script, so thank you to them. I would also like to note, mostly for my own sanity, this will get quite convoluted. When I began making this, I thought it would be a cute, surface-level storytelling piece, but it's ended up being so much more than that. I'll leave it up to you to establish whether it's too much or whether it's a modern manifestation of creative genius, but I'd like everyone to be prepared that we're effectively going to be handling an entire fictitious town's history here. But before we do this, we'll take a short moment to acknowledge the existent but barely regarded lore that existed in Disney Springs' earlier incarnation, Downtown Disney, and specifically Pleasure Island. In doing this, we'll not only highlight the foundations set for the story to come, but also the differences in their development and executions. Pleasure Island's backstory was based on the fictitious legend of the unfortunately named Meriwether Adam Pleasure, an industrialist and inventor who debarked his Mississippi riverboat at Lake Buena Vista, staked his claim on the island, and, again somewhat unfortunately, named it Pleasure Island. After setting up the pleasure canvas and sailmaking enterprise, other enterprises joined the island's lineup, including factories, administration buildings, a library, and a firework factory. In the 1940s, Meriwether was lost at sea and the island fell into regret, and 4 decades later, the Disney Imagineers discovered the island and got to work, creating an entertainment complex full of roller rinks, clubs, and movie theatres. This backstory was exclusively for Pleasure Island and didn't extend to or account for the rest of Downtown Disney, which was standing at the time of Pleasure Island's debut. Disney Springs, however, has a bit more going on, and the lore encompasses the entire shopping complex. There are a lot of ties to the lore throughout, but it has some very distinct similarities to the story laid out for Pleasure Island. In its most simple form, the origin story for Disney Springs is that Martin Sinclair, a cattle rancher from South Carolina, discovered a freshwater spring source in the mid-1800s while searching for a place for his family to settle and, despite the particularly heavy rain he encountered, chose to settle there, with the springs offering the benefits of trade, transport, cleanliness, and of course, drinking water. Interestingly, the core concept is pretty well rooted in historical accuracy. Exploring Florida's Migration History by James Gregory cites the Great Citrus Rush and land boom as key drivers of migration from neighbouring states into Florida in the late 1800s, and likewise, the choice to theme the story around water also makes plenty of sense, given how important a role water has played in not only the development of Florida, but also Florida's tourism. All you need to do is look at the Fountain of Youth attractions at Augustine's, the swamp boat tours, or the opportunities to swim with manatees to see this in action. This rooted origin story was described by Imagineer Theronskis as being as much of a story about the history of Florida as it is a Disney story. Whilst on the topic of historical accuracy, I would like to highlight that there are a few obvious examples of tactful topic avoidances, which we'll see as we progress with our deep dive into the given lore. I understand that in an escapist tourist product, there is not necessarily a responsibility to address said topics, but I'd like to. The acquisition of seemingly unclaimed land, the mention of dedicated employees, and indications of post-war economic crises leading to simpler life choices are all ideas reminiscent of a broader history which, as per Disney Magic, is not explored, but may well have been key driving factors in the development of this fictitious land. While canonically this settlement occurred in a post-abolition timeline, it still has echoes of and parallels to be drawn with true impactful events. As with some of Florida's wider factual history, a lot of individual success was achieved at the disadvantage of others, so I don't want it to seem like, in the presentation of a shiny, happy, shopping mall lore, that this history is being undermined or erased in this discussion. But back into it. When Sinclair settled, he created a cattle ranch, and the cattle ranch developed around the springs was named Golden Oak, after a particularly pretty adjacent oak tree. It quickly became very prosperous, and the town's entrepreneurial offerings diversified to include glorious bottled water straight from the springs amongst other things. You can see relics from the springs bottling company's past, including irrigation pumps, bottling plants and defunct conveyor belts, plus nods to the Sunshine State Iceworks, who use the springs water to create ice for local businesses and homes. The huge Disney Springs water tower serves not only as a visual marker of location, but also of history, further nodding to the established lore. Over time, Disney Springs expanded in response to its population growth, and served as a stopover for some famous faces including Globetrotters Indiana Jones and his pilot Jock Lindsay, who, in the late 1930s, purchased a waterfront property, built an airline hangar, air tower and runway, thus creating a stopover base for travellers, including members of the Society of Explorers and Adventurers. Prior to his death, Martin divided up his land into smaller plots which were given to his employees, leaving only the original house in the Sinclair family hands. These divided plots would eventually become more developed, and 4 distinct sections of Disney Springs would emerge: West Side, The Landing, Marketplace, and Town Centre. I couldn't find anything in my research to canonically explain where the Disney part of Disney Springs came from, so please let me know in the comments below if you happen to know the answer to that one. Breaking away from the immersion and back to reality for a moment, some of these areas already existed prior to the overhaul, with both the West Side and the Village Marketplace present in downtown Disney. There are also 2 other areas that I won't be discussing, as they're frequently omitted in both Disney and Reedy Creek documents when discussing Springs and don't really aid this video narratively, but they are the Gateway, which pretty much covers the parking and security entrances, and the Springs, which appears to refer to the bodies of water which separate Town Centre area and the old Pleasure Island land, which is now known as The Landing. I've marked these boundaries to the best of my abilities on a handy map shown here for your perusal. Dave Hoffman, a creative director at Walt Disney Imagineering, explained how it was important when creating and designing the different sectors, that each one reflected their function and the fictitious time period in which they were developed. And this was most notably achieved through the shopping complex's architecture, which we'll be discussing. Interestingly, the idea of utilising early 20th century architecture at Disney Springs dates back to its lost spiritual predecessor, Hyperion Wharf, which will also get a video of its own in due course. But here we first see it demonstrated in our main section, Town Centre. In this story, the town centre grew around the main springs and was the first area to be heavily developed. While many report this to have occurred around the 1920s, there are markers to indicate its foundations were actually laid a decade earlier. The Springs, note the lack of Disney branding, fire department building was built in 1908 and has since enjoyed a new lease of life as a set of bathrooms. Similarly, the Market building, which houses fan favourites like Lululemon and Sugarboo & Co, was built in 1913. This would explain why these spots look and feel a bit different to some of the others in the area. In this section of Disney Springs, you'll find this demonstrated through a promenade complete with a lovely fountain, shops and restaurants including Deluxe Burger, sturdy stucco facades, red terracotta tile roofs, and wrought iron faux balcony features are all hallmarks of the Mediterranean Revival architecture era, which can also be seen here. Not only does the town centre area aesthetically mirror Florida's older city, St. Augustine's, but its key water feature may also be a nod to the aforementioned Fountain of Youth, a historic spring reportedly discovered by Spanish explorer Ponce de Leon. While there's a lot of contention about the validity of that story as a whole, it would nicely tie in both the local history and the Mediterranean-style architecture to have it evidenced here. Elsewhere in the world, Art Deco and functionalism were popular decorative styles, strangely balancing a style driven by rich, vibrant colours, cultural motifs, and geometric shapes with almost brutal utilitarian art, focused solely on functionality. So you can see why the designers chose to go with the warmer, more Floridian-inspired Mediterranean-style look, given that this was the preferred architectural style in the state. Many of Florida's most distinct-looking buildings were built in this style in the 1920s, and it was especially popular in hotels and theatres. One fun thing to note narratively is a tongue-in-cheek reference to the section's early 20th century roots in Deluxe Burger. This luxury burger spot, located in a bright cabin with big bright windows, wooden beam ceilings and a white picket fence, was the original cow rancher's cabin, also known as the Sinclair family house, and now, respectfully, honours its roots and serves up signature blend beef burgers. The restaurant opened as Glowing Oak Ranch on February 26, 1905, before rebranding to become the Golden Oak Restaurant in 1921. Martin was inspired to sell burgers after attending the St. Louis World Fair, formerly known as the Louisiana Purchase Exposition, and after seeing their success, decided to try his hand at the endeavour, much to the misfortune of his cattle supply. At some point in this window, whether before or after the opening of his craft hamburger restaurant, Martin became known as the Cattle King of the Springs. But Martin wasn't alone in his success, as plenty of sources cite other businesses operating in the area, including the Buena Vista Timber Company, which was established in 1868. There's not too much that even the most dedicated sources can offer about their backstory, except that they operated the old lumber mill which now houses Blaze Pizza, and boasts vaulted ceilings and the long wooden tables, perhaps made from logs pulled directly from the springs below. Another nod to the empire can be seen in the Coca-Cola shop, which is modelled after a 1920s bottling plant. While now clad with wraparound glass walkways and neon lights, you'll see markings on the side to indicate the history, including one which reads "Drink Coca-Cola in bottles." And as an interesting tidbit, the first ever glass of Coca-Cola was sold in Florida's neighbouring state Georgia back in 1886. The last notable business entry to the town centre is the city's planetarium, which sits just on the cusp of the boundaries. Now home to Planet Hollywood and the attached Stargazers Bar, the planetarium opened as a 4-storey Victorian-era stargazing observatory. Presumably after its closure, it was canonically abandoned as the spot for stargazing, and instead repurposed into a restaurant full of memorabilia from the movie stars. As a final entry for the area, there's a throwaway piece of theming with the Frontera Athena, with the building being branded as the Springs Foundry, established in 1871. While unconfirmed, it's likely that this spot was responsible for creating some of the necessary components for the adjacent iceworks located in the Sprinkles building, but we'll talk about that very soon. In terms of timeline, this would make this one of the very first buildings to be built in the area, preceded only by the Golden Oak Ranch and the Buena Vista Timber Company's lumber mill. After the foundry, the ice house emerged on the riverfront, likely followed by the planetarium and the Coca-Cola bottling plant. And next up is The Landing, which was designed to be the marina and Disney Springs community transportation hub for both goods and settlers. This area, developed around methods of transport and general movement, is supposed to have a bit more of an industrial feel than other parts of the shopping complex, but at its heart is described by Imagineering as being all about the water. Ironically, or perhaps a commitment to the thematic bit, the Sasagula boat dock located here, which once transported guests between Disney Springs and nearby resorts upon opening, has since been closed. One particularly clear embodiment of this industrialism is the Sprinkles Cupcake Shop, whose building used to be the town's ice house. As you turn the corner, you'll see a defunct water pump, now ancient machinery, and a weathered sign, which indicates that it was used for a spring water iceworks operation by the Sunshine Iceworks Company, which was established in 1873. Although technically Sprinkles falls within the boundaries of the marketplace area, it overlooks the landing boundaries and as such can be included here as it feels thematically better suited to this area. Many of the offerings here are overtly or vaguely transport themed, alluding to the area's trading history, including the boathouse, which has a very specific nautical kitsch yet high-end sophistication feel, and Paddlefish, which is located aboard an anchored replica steamboat and boasts incredible views of the surrounding waters. And then there's Jock Lindsay's Hangar Bar, an aviation-themed dive bar which is part IP integration, part deep Disney lore entrenchment. As I mentioned previously, Jock Lindsay's has ties to another side lore, the Society of Explorers and Adventurers, and there are plenty of great videos exploring that topic in depth, which I'd recommend giving a watch after this. Another great execution of the area's theming is the offering of the vintage Amphicar cruises, which depart from the side of the boathouse and take guests on a 20-minute guided tour of the Lake Buena Vista waters. As you walk through the area, you'll also see a few decorative panels which depict different water-related activities, including hauling ice and a fisherman helping a woman onto a boat for a recreational ride. A mural on the side of a wall also reads Springs Brand Mineral Waters, clear and refreshing, alluding to the bottled water trade which operated in the area. One outlet which warrants a notable mention is the Edison, which sits close to the pedestrian bridge which connects the landing and the west side. While on the Disney Springs website, the restaurant is described to sit in an abandoned 1920s power plant, an overhead carving indicates that the structure opened back in 1901. An interesting thing about the Edison is that it further clarifies the time frame of this area, placing us around the 1920s, a time when transatlantic explorer/adventurer flights were on the incline and the Prohibition raged, thus contextualising the only speakeasy on Disney Springs property, Enzo's Hideaway Tunnel Bar, which is tucked under the pedestrian bridge. To the left of the Edison's entryway, there's a mural on the side of the Maria and Enzo's Ristorante building which reads Trans-Global Airways, dream it, then do it, a phrase frequently misattributed to Walt Disney which here refers to the area's aviation history, linking us again to Jock Lindsay's. In the lore, Maria and Enzo's Ristorante is an elegant Italian trattoria which boasts 50-foot ceilings, views of Lake Buena Vista, and a first-class lounge for first-class dining. Having immigrated to Central Florida in the 1920s, Maria and Enzo, an airline pilot himself, opened their restaurant in a long-forgotten seaplane air terminal, restored to its former glory and decorated with illustrated pictographs, complete with boarding gates and a ticket desk. While Maria opened Pizza Ponte, a quick-service cafe located in the old terminal lobby, Enzo had other plans. Located beneath the main tunnel building is the aforementioned speakeasy, Enzo's Hideaway Tunnel Bar. During the air terminal renovations, the entrepreneurial pair discovered a cavern which was once home to aerial rum runners, full of evidence of their presence including bottles and rum casks, and rosters marked with code names. This cosy spot now operates as a space for dining and socialising. I'd like to note that there are a few inconsistencies in the lore of these spots that I'd like clarification on. Most notably, many outlets allude to the idea that following their immigration in the 1920s, Maria and Enzo opened their restaurant quickly after arriving. Bear in mind that the Prohibition was raging up until the 1930s, which was around the time that Jock Lindsay and Co purchased their hangar, presumably using the speakeasy themselves. If, as outlets would suggest, the terminal had been abandoned and the hideaway used in the Prohibition, there's no way that, as indicated, decades could have passed before the space was renovated. As such, it would be fair to assume that these renovations, and likely also the renovations of the adjacent Edison restaurant, occurred later in the timeline, perhaps in the 1970s or 80s when Lake Buena Vista shopping villages first opened. This in turn would completely erase the existence of Pleasure Island as a whole, which was perhaps one of the intentions of the wider renovation project. There's a seemingly unassuming mural located elsewhere in the area which could suggest that this was the case. Set back against a brick wall, a painting advertising famous Florida citrus is adorned with the tagline "Grown in the Florida sunshine from spring-fed groves" and a picture of the orange bird. This small fellow was created as a mascot for the Florida Citrus Commission back in 1970 and featured in advertisements up until the late 80s, at which point it faded into obscurity. As such, it would be fair to assume that developments were still occurring in the area up until this point, perhaps adding some extra validity to my above theories. This would put Maria and Enzo's in at least their 70s, but age should never stop anyone from achieving their dreams. Speculation aside, there are a few other shops in the area which feel like half-related curveballs, including the STK restaurant, which sits inside the town's old train station building. While train tracks are embedded into the ground outside, nothing internally seems to represent the building's history. Others are slightly clearer, however, like Gideon's Cookie Bake House, which is located in an old bookshop. Owned by Jonathan Lindworm back in 1898, you can still see plenty of books and pages in the windows in the store itself. As a side note, while I was in the process of working on this, Gideon's announced that they were going to be telling the centuries-long history of their shop and its mysterious characters in detail, over the next few months to celebrate the store's 5th anniversary. Not too much has been announced or shared just yet, so I don't intend to wait for that to come out to bulk up this video. But let me know in the comments if once that's all released, you'd prefer a re-release of this video with that section added in, or rather an independent Lore of Gideon's video and we can put that out instead. Similarly, the Ganachery sits inside a building which reportedly functioned as the apothecary, presumably to aid both residents and sick travellers who arrived at the marina. Nods to both its history and cultural impacts can still be found inside the store, including the tongue-in-cheek tagline, "Your cure to the common chocolate." Our final lore-supporting entry is Cooks of Dublin's, a family-owned eatery serving Dublin-esque dishes, which is attached to Raglan Road. Having been established in 1934, the presence of Cooks confirms continuous developments in the area. While Jock Lindsay purchased the existing hangar in the same time frame, Cooks is indicative of business expansion and wider immigration, perhaps by air or sea. The adjacent Raglan Road takes it a step further by showcasing a bright display of music, culture and entertainment. Now described as a suburban neighbourhood setting where you can shop for all your Disney souvenirs, the marketplace follows, having been developed later in the Disney Springs timeline. Emerging around the 1930s, the marketplace is driven by a feel of domesticity, and with an ornate ironwork is out, simplicity is in vibe, demonstrates an American craftsman style of architecture. Open floor plans, earth-toned exteriors, handcrafted details including nooks and fireplaces which were especially popular, and overhanging eaves all make appearances in this section, which contains the World of Disney store, arguably the biggest open floor plan on property at 51,000 square foot. These characteristics can be seen in nearly every store in the area, with overhangs and covered entryways seen in the Marketplace Co-op, Ghirardelli's soda fountain, Starbucks and the Lego store to name a few. And houses using this architectural style can be found in the nearby real-life historic district of Lake Eola Heights. While I couldn't find anything to confirm this, it's fair to assume that, in the story, this served as a base for shopping and food. It would also be fair to assume that the Marketplace Co-op modelled the origins of the area, being described as a retail emporium and containing D-Tech on Demand, Disney Centerpiece and Disney Tales. Although in the 1930s it was more likely that guests could purchase household staples and oranges than branded phone cases and dog accessories, but there's not too much information to be found on the area. And finally, the west side is the entertainment district of Disney Springs, offering exciting and exuberant entertainment and dining. The post-war economic expansion saw a rise of disposable income and, in turn, an increased appetite for entertainment, which is reflected here in the west side. Described as a town expo developed by the leaders of Disney Springs, it's connected to the landing by a pedestrian bridge. A portrait depicting the town's 1950 expo, likely inspired by the St. Louis World Fair Sinclair attended back in 1905, can be found in the Guest Services Lodge, hanging on the walls overhead. Circus tents, train tracks, street performers, hot air balloons and Ferris wheels can all be seen in this bright painting, and I think it's actually a really clever way to tie the existing buildings into the story they'd built. Within Springs, the increased demand for entertainment in the broader context of the lore is reflected in the House of Blues concert venue, the AMC movie theatre, Splitsville bowling alley, the Cirque du Soleil tent, the hot air balloon ride and, at the time of opening, Disney Quest, which was a multi-storey arcade featuring a mix of classic-style video games and futuristic tech. At a stretch, even the NBA experience which replaced Disney Quest still fit in, as the brand debuted back in the 1940s. When it first opened, the West Side really leaned into the 1950s Googie style, and in 2017, the AMC Cinema Theatre sign was made up of trapezoid shapes and primary colours, and the building itself was decorated with squiggles, for technical terms, and starbursts. While this has since been exchanged for a more neutral look, the rest of the area is a mishmash of curved buildings and curvy overhangs, countered with sleek, sharp lines and defunct train tracks. But now, having traded a lot of its visual identity for a more neutral, stylised aesthetic, the West Side feels further removed from the rest of the area and the broader Disney Springs lore. So, are we ready for a roundup? After arriving in the mid-19th century, Sinclair moved his family down. In the next decade or so, the Buena Vista Timber Company, the Springs Foundry, and the Sunshine Ice Works were all established, before, around the turn of the century, a focus was placed on building a society and improving qualities of life, with the booksellers and a power plant opening up by 1901. The Golden Oak Ranch opened in 1905, serving as the town's first major restaurant, and the area continued to grow, specifically with an emphasis on trade and transport over the next 30 years. By the 1950s, a century after its establishment as a community, both a central shopping and an entertainment district had opened, thus creating the Disney Springs that we know and love today. All caught up? So, Now that we understand what the law is and how it impacted the appearance and passive storytelling at Disney Springs, it's time to consider what was the purpose of this endeavour. Why, in designing a perfectly functioning collection of stores, present only to tout pay-to-play products and to sell merchandise to guests on their designated rest days from the parks, was it deemed to world build so dramatically? After all, malls around the world don't have law. Universal City Walk doesn't have law, Disney Village in Disneyland Paris doesn't have law, and Downtown Disney in Disneyland California also does not have law. So why is Disney Springs different? A lot of it may be to do with brand identity, especially in Florida. Around the 1990s, Disney was well known for the Disney difference, and this played an important role in establishing them as industry leaders rather than just competitors in the Orlando theme park space, as they competed with the likes of Universal Studios and SeaWorld. The Disney Springs rebrand and renovation offered a chance to completely overhaul an aging product which, with the exception of a few name changes and the since-defunct Pleasure Island, had largely remained consistent, if not arguably stagnant, since its inception back in the 1970s. And also consider this. Disney Springs was the company's biggest opening in Orlando since Animal Kingdom back in 1998. While nowhere near as significant as a brand new theme park, it was an opportunity to prove that Disney still had it. In 2015, when Disney Springs opened, Walt Disney World was slowly emerging from 3 years of overhauls and closures. New hotels, refurbished rides, new Fantasyland parades, meet and greets, and big ticket offerings like Seven Dwarfs Mine Train had all debuted in the years prior, so there was definitely a focus on change both inside and outside the park, which maybe hadn't been as big a concern in the decades since Eisner's departure from the company. In retrospect, we can assess that this was one of the last attempts to build a large-scale immersive Disney difference-driven product, but to understand the importance of this, we should look further into the why. So why does the Disney Springs law exist? There is some speculation as to the reasons behind this change, including to make Downtown Disney a truly family-friendly day destination and ensuring it's welcoming for all demographics, which was one of the driving factors behind closing the Pleasure Island clubs initially. Another speculation was that the overhaul occurred to aid the unification of existing separate areas to create a more cohesive product offering, which, no matter how you perceive the success of the execution, was achieved through the law on offer. But I believe that we should also look back to Michael Eisner's original intentions for developing Downtown Disney to truly understand why it came to be and why it had to change, as because we're unfortunately in the business of theme parks, there's nearly always a financial motive. Even historically, Disney trips are a luxury for most. Many families choose to stay or enjoy meals or entertainment off-site, which is basically why International Drive thrives today. Popular activities for visiting families include mini-golf, swamp speedboats, swimming with manatees or dolphins, or trips to the mall or the outlets. And while this is good for the independent operators, it's bad for Disney, who would benefit from keeping that trade within their bubble. So when the Disney company introduced Pleasure Island in the late 80s, it was driven by Eisner and Wells' ambition to keep income in their company's pockets rather than a competitor's, no matter how much, and the desire to redirect off-site traffic from popular destinations like downtown Orlando's Church Street back on site, keeping them on property and spending more. It's very possible that, as it was 3 decades ago, this was an influential factor in the Disney Springs development plan. Additionally, creating a more cohesive product would be beneficial for the company, as it would present Disney Springs as a destination rather than a shopping mall or outlets, and, as we touched on previously in our initial discussion on the appeal of malls, offer a sense of suburban small-town comfort with a slower pace of life and walkability, seldom found elsewhere in Florida or in other major cities in the United States. Thus perfectly capturing and demonstrating the dreams of the everyman to be able to access natural resources and walkable spaces, which many visitors will not have at home. There have been plenty reports about the beneficial free offerings it Springs, such as live entertainment, plus its other contributions to the Orlando community, including footbridges and the extended bus lines. Almost ironically, given what it's trying to achieve, this suburban setting offers a different sense of escapism to the bright, hyper-immersive experience offered in the theme parks. Also, to take things back to basics, creating a product which feels interesting and immersive increases competitiveness. If Disney Springs has the same elements and components of the theme parks, think curated design, desirable dining, live entertainment, attractions and interesting shopping spots, it begins to almost be perceived as part of the core, essential Disney package offering, rather than something on the side which you might visit to waste some time, perhaps even going as far as being perceived as a 5th theme park. Therefore, as a desirable destination, it may be picked in favour of comparable counterparts like the aforementioned Florida Mall and Premium Outlets, which are a staple spot for many visitors, achieving our core business goal. So hypothetically, noticing that shopping foot traffic was decreasing and moving elsewhere, whether motivated by finances or quality of offerings, the Disney company undertook a major overhaul project to make downtown Disney feel fresh again, and Disney Springs was born. When I started writing this script, the video appeared to be heading towards a jibing narrative piece, poking fun at the lore of Disney Springs and how, in an attempt to differentiate every product, it was only a matter of time before something as mundane as a shopping mall on Disney property developed its own backstory and world building. Perhaps the Disney Springs redesign was less about fabricated immersion and was instead more of an architectural vanity project, with the surface-level backstory shoehorned in to justify the conflicting adjacent designs and the pre-existing contractual obligations. But as I moved further through my research, I began to see it more as an opportunity for Imagineers to showcase their talents and varied interests, breathing a new, exciting life into the area for those who wish to enjoy it, while selectively honouring some of the state's history. And so, to conclude, I am an unexpected Disney Springs sympathiser. While some of its benefits are unfortunately a product of a broader, poorly executed social system, Disney Springs, like much of Walt Disney World, offers a sense of European tranquility, creating walkable spaces in an otherwise car-reliant environment, and that isn't such a bad thing. Here, you won't find an ill-informed pedestrian route or a walking path which requires you to traverse along a highway, but instead you'll find a homely feeling, comfortable space which offers safety and an opportunity to enjoy natural bodies of water, plus curated greenery. Say what you will about the execution of a castle ranching backstory, but I feel that, given the pretty neutral state of downtown Disney in the 2010s, the Disney Springs development was absolutely necessary, even if it did deliver some questionable and, depending who you talk to, somewhat uninspired lore with it. But maybe that's the point. Perhaps the entire drive behind opening Disney Springs as Disney Springs was an opportunity to either satirise or pay homage to Florida's original roots and intentions, creating a place which was serene, bright, shiny and sunny, and far removed from the industrial developments elsewhere in the surrounding cities. So that, folks, was our investigation into the application and execution of the absurd lore of Disney Springs, even if it did unintentionally spiral into an episode of Architectural Digest. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so I can justify talking about Mediterranean-inspired interior design features forevermore, and let me know in the comments. As always, I'd be really eager to speak to anyone who worked on the creative side of the Disney Springs project, or anyone who worked at Pleasure Island, Disney Quest, or really wider downtown Disney, as I've got those penciled in for a future video. But let me know your thoughts on the importance of the lore. Is it necessary to add it to every hotel, park or shopping centre? And does it actually add anything to these offerings? Do you feel like you understand Disney Springs better now, or would you rather just view it as a shopping centre alone? I'm eager to hear your thoughts, but for now, thank you for watching, feel free to like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this video, and see you real soon.